this video, I'm going to make a beautiful nano tank for some Bloody Mary shrimp. Make sure you stick around as I'll also be adding more than just the shrimp into this lively tank. To start off, I'm going to be using aqua soil for the substrate. Aqua soil is a great substrate that has lots of nutrients for the life going into the tank and also looks really good against the green plants. It's a pretty expensive way of doing it, but for the nano tank like this, one bag is more than enough. For the light, I'm just using what came with the kit. It's an Aqua shrimp tank kit, and as you can see, the light is super bright and is perfect for this size of tank. For the hardscape, I wanted to have big rocks at the front sloping down to give it more depth. I have lots of rocks to choose from at different sizes and textures like this grey mountain rock stone. I think it will look really cool against the different colours I'm putting into this tank. I also had some dragonstone I was thinking of using instead, but again I just loved the look of the mountain rocks in this tank. Once I was happy with the rocks I was going to use, I then started to place them into the tank and work on the placement of them. Like I said, I wanted them to create a small wall and slope down to create depth, and also separate the planted area of the tank from the front of the tank. Once I was happy with the placement of the bigger rocks, I then added some smaller stones in front of them to add more realism to it. I think doing this makes it look really cool and a lot more natural. I then also wanted to add some gravel around the rocks to again make it more realistic and have more flow towards the other rocks to stop it looking so harsh. Again, adding these little bits of detail really help everything work together. After I added the stones and rocks, it was then time to add some wood. I have some spiderwood here as I think it looks amazing against the grey mountain rocks. I worked on the placement for a while and decided to go for something like this. I also added a small stone to the left of the rocks to make the transition from the wood to the rocks more natural. Overall, I think this looks amazing and I was really happy with the placement. To keep the spiderwood down and stop it from floating once I added water, I simply glued the wood to the rock using tissue and glue. Once I was happy with everything, it was then time to plant the tank. Before planting, I made sure to wet the aqua soil so the plants wouldn't dry out as I was working on them. For the plants at the front, I'm using a lantine hydropiper. This plant is a slow growing carpeting plant and over time should fill the front of the tank. For the middle of the tank, I wanted to have a few bushy plants between the wood and fill in the gaps. On the left of this tank, I'll be using Cryptocorny Willisii. I really like the look of this plant as it's completely different to any of the other plants going in, giving it more texture to the scape. For the plant on the right, I'm using another Cryptocorny, but this one is a Becketi Pechi. Super similar to the plant on the left, but it's a little bit more bushier and has different texture. For the plant in the middle, I'm using an Anubias Bartera Nana. This plant can't be planted into the substrate, so I used a small amount of glue and attached it to the wood. After that, I wanted to fill in some gaps between the rocks with some Christmas moss. Over time, this should fill in the gaps pretty nicely. You only need a small amount of glue to place the Christmas moss into it, and eventually it should attach itself to the rocks over time as well. "24 hours later, we then added the water into the tank. You can see that it's super cloudy and needed a filter on it, so we attached the filter onto the tank and let it run for a few hours to clean things up again. I added the water this early so that it's easier to plant the stemming plants. Also, doing this gives you a better vision of what the tank will actually look like. Overall, I was really happy with how the tank turned out. It became super clear and the plants stand out really well in front of the rocks and wood. Once the tank settled down a little, it was time to add the stemming plants. For the stemming plants, I'm using Limnophylla sessiliflora. This stem plant grows really fast and you'll see what I mean once I show you the tank after a few weeks at the end of the video. It really does cover the tank completely. I did have a different type of stemming plant to go in the back with this one, but I completely forgot that I had it. To prepare the stemming plants for the tank, all I do is separate the roots from the gunk that's on them, and separate them into individual stems so you get more for your money. When planting, I made sure to get the roots as deep as possible. After planting everything, this is what it looks like for now. Take a mental image of this, as it does change quite a lot in the space of a few weeks. I also added 2 red spotted snails to keep the tank clean while it cycles. Two weeks later, and the tank was looking a lot different. It was funny editing this, as the jump from putting the plants in to a few weeks later was pretty insane. You can see those stem plants in the background have grown a crazy amount in such a short time. You can see that the moss and carpeting plants are starting to grow in, as well as the middle plants slowly growing too. I also added some floating plants as well, as I've always liked the look of them. The water had a slight yellow tinge to it, and the plants were out of control, so I wanted to do some maintenance to the tank. I first got rid of some of the floating plants, as they were taking the light away from the plants down at the bottom. Once I did that, I then needed to trim the stem plants in the background, as they were overgrown massively. These stem plants are pretty delicate, so I had to be careful not to trim any that didn't need trimmed. One thing I didn't know about this plant is when the light is off at night, the plant actually goes into a little cup shape, which is pretty cool. And don't worry, I will be using these plants in the future, so I just put them in another tank for now. I also added some plecos during the week, as I've had massive algae problems, as this is my first fish tank I've ever done, so I had some learning curves. For the water change, I only did a small water change, about 25-30%. That's all that was really needed, but I may end up doing a bigger one in the future. While doing the water change, you can see one of the plecos wanted to say hi. You can see with the water change, taking out the floating plants and cutting the plants, it's completely cleaned up and looks good to go for some shrimp. Around 24 hours later, I then added the shrimp and a guppy fish. The guppy fish was a last minute decision I made at the fish shop. I seen him and instantly wanted to have him in the tank. With the pure white colour he has, I thought it would look amazing against the greens. After a few hours of adding the shrimp, they were already about exploring and dancing their legs away. I really love how everything turned out in this tank, and for it being my first ever fish tank, I think I did a decent job. Let me know what you think of the tank in the comments and any tips you might have about any future fish tanks I do. I do want to do another shrimp tank at some point, but I'll get back to what I know best, and that's vivariums. So make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out on any future builds.